I don't need a husband, Mr. Brooks. I need someone who can fix a fence, pull a calf, and not eat more than he earns. Anna Whitmore has 30 days before the first hard frost and a cattle pen that won't hold. Her barn burned in September, her best hands rode out the same week, and the advertisement she placed in 3 county papers was supposed to bring her one capable man. What arrived instead was Daniel Brooks, a widower with 2 small children, a wagon held together by wire and stubbornness, and the quiet, careful manner of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible. Anna figured she'd just inherited 3 more mouths to feed. She was wrong about almost everything. The ad had been blunt because Anna Whitmore did not have time to be anything else. Able-bodied man sought for working ranch, Callow Creek vicinity, Montana Territory. Must ride, rope, and carry weight. Inquire at Whitmore Ranch, 7 miles north of Ridgeline. She had paid for 3 papers and crossed her fingers, which was about as close to prayer as she got these days. By the second week of October, 4 men had come and gone. The first 2 left after seeing the state of the north fence. The third had a drinking problem he hadn't mentioned in his letter. The fourth had looked at her the way men sometimes looked at a woman alone on a property, sizing up what she owned rather than what she needed, and she had shown him the door and the rifle at the same time. She wasn't sorry. She was standing at the porch rail with a cup of coffee gone cold when the wagon came up the road. It was a gray afternoon, the kind of sky that squinted at you like it was deciding whether to snow. The wagon was old, one wheel sitting slightly higher than the others, and the horse pulling it had clearly seen better decades. Anna set the cup down without drinking from it. She watched the wagon stop at the gate. The man who climbed down was tall and moved with the deliberate economy of someone whose back had learned to negotiate with him. He was 35 or so, dark-haired, unshaven in a way that suggested 2 days of road rather than habit. He tied the horse to the post with a knot that Anna recognized without thinking about it, a double hitch, the kind that held in wind. He walked to the gate and opened it, went back and led the wagon through, then closed it again behind him. He didn't leave gates open. That was something. Then the canvas at the back of the wagon shifted, and a small face appeared. Then a second, smaller face beside the first. Anna felt the specific sensation of a plan dissolving. He came up the path and stopped a respectful distance from the porch steps. His hat was in his hands before she said a word. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "I'm Daniel Brooks. I saw your advertisement in the Ridgeline Courier." His voice was low and even, the kind that didn't carry inflection easily, and his eyes were a tired brown that looked at her straight on without flinching or performing. Anna looked past him at the wagon. "The advertisement," she said, "did not mention children." "No, ma'am. It didn't." He didn't argue with that. "How old?" 9 and 4. "Boy and a girl. They're quiet and they work. Eli, the older one, he's managed horses since he was 6. He paused. "I wouldn't have come if I thought they'd be a burden." I know that's not a small thing to say. Anna stepped down off the porch because she thought better on her feet. She walked to the wagon and looked at the 2 children properly. The boy Eli met her eyes without blinking, which she respected. He was dark-haired like his father, with the particular stillness of a child who had learned not to make situations worse. The little girl was curled against him, half asleep, clutching a piece of old quilting. She had a streak of road dust along her cheek. "What happened to their mother?" Anna said. "She died 2 years ago. February." He said it plainly. The way people said things they had already said so many times, the grief had worn smooth on the outside. Anna looked at the girl's sleeping face for a moment longer than she intended. She turned back to Daniel Brooks. "The barn burned 6 weeks ago. I've got 12 hands short of what I need for the season and a north fence that's held together with hope and wires since August. I can't pay much." She said the number. He didn't flinch at it. "That's reasonable," he said. "It's not reasonable. It's what I have." "Then it's what I'll take." She studied him for 3 long seconds, which was how long it took her to decide she wasn't going to send him away that night. The children were a problem she hadn't solved yet. But the gate, the double hitch, those things meant something, and Anna Whitmore had learned to read men's hands before she read their faces. "There's a bunkhouse," she said. "Room enough for 3. Supper's at 6. You miss it, you go hungry." She turned back to the porch, then stopped. "Mr. Brooks, the fence on the north pasture, can you look at it today before the light goes?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She picked up her cold coffee. because it won't hold through the week. She was halfway through the door when she heard the sound of him unhitching the wagon horse, speaking quietly to the animal in the easy, unhurried way of someone who had done it 10,000 times. She didn't look back, but she listened for a moment longer than she needed to. Daniel walked the north fence alone while the children stayed in the wagon with the book Eli always carried. The fence was worse than the advertisement had made it sound, which meant it was worse than Anna Whitmore had been willing to admit in print. 3 posts had rotted through at the base. 2 stretches of wire had been twisted back on themselves rather than replaced, which held until it didn't. One section near the creek crossing had been spliced with rope, which was not a long-term solution in any weather and was certainly not a solution in Montana October. He spent 40 minutes walking the line, and then he went to the tool shed without being asked, found a post digger and a coil of new wire, and started on the worst section before the last of the light left the sky. He was still working when Anna came to the fence at dusk, a lantern in one hand and a look on her face that was not quite suspicion and not quite surprise. She held the lantern up and looked at what he'd done. 2 new posts, set and tamped, 6 feet of wire replaced and tensioned. He was halfway through the 3rd post hole. "You didn't have to start tonight," she said. "You said it wouldn't hold through the week." He didn't stop digging. "That's true." So tonight made sense. She held the lantern steady so the light fell where he was working, and she didn't say anything else for a while, which he was grateful for. He had been talked at enough in his life. He dug. She held the light. The wind off the mountains was sharp and carried the first real cold of the coming season. After a time, she said, "The advertisement. You said you saw it in the Ridgeline Courier." "That's right. That's a fair distance to come. I was passing through." It was true, as far as it went. She was quiet again. Then, "Did you ask about the ranch before you came out?" Something in the question landed carefully. He looked up from the hole. "I asked at the general store. I was told the owner was a woman managing alone after a barn fire. That there'd been some hands leave." He paused. Standard thing to ask before riding out 7 miles. "Who else did you talk to?" He studied her face in the lantern light. She was asking something specific and trying not to show she was asking it. "Nobody else," he said. "Why?" "No reason." She said it a beat too quickly. "Supper's in 10 minutes. Finish this tomorrow." He watched her walk back toward the house with the lantern swinging at her side, and he noticed that she checked the far road once before she went inside. Just a glance. The way people do when they're used to checking, when something out there has already made them careful. Daniel set the post digger against the fence and looked out at the road himself, at the dark where it curved away toward Ridgeline, at the flat land beyond the gate. He hadn't asked how many papers she'd placed the advertisement in. He needed to ask, because if the advertisement had run in the Copper Falls Gazette, then it had run in the same town where Harlan Voss had his offices, and that changed things considerably. He made himself wait until morning to ask. He made himself eat supper and let Eli carry the conversation and watch little Clara charm Anna Whitmore out of the rigid set of her jaw with nothing more than falling asleep at the table, face pressed into her own arm, a half-eaten biscuit still in her hand. He made himself not look at the road again until he was walking back to the bunkhouse in the dark. But he did look, and the road was empty and quiet, and the distance between Ridgeline and Copper Falls was 40 miles, which was either close enough to be a problem or far enough to buy some time. He didn't know yet which one it was going to be. 3 days passed before Daniel found the cut pipe. He found it on a Tuesday morning, following the water line from the creek to the South Trough, which Anna had mentioned twice without calling it a problem, which meant it was a problem. The line ran underground for most of its length, but where it crossed the dry wash near the south pasture gate it surfaced for about 8 feet, and that was where someone had cut it. Not broken, not cracked from frost. Cut, with something sharp, and then bent the ends back toward the ground so that at a distance you'd think you were seeing a dip in the line, not a gap in it. Daniel knelt in the dirt and looked at the cut for a long moment. He didn't touch it yet. The grass around it was compressed in 2 places where knees had rested, and those impressions were 2, maybe 3 days old. Before he'd arrived, he fixed the pipe. He used copper fittings from the tool shed, which was stocked better than he'd expected, and he sealed the joints the right way and buried the line back under 2 inches of packed earth, and said nothing about it to Anna over dinner. He waited until she came out to check the South Trough herself, which she did 2 mornings later, because Anna Whitmore checked things. He was in the paddock with Eli when he heard the pause in her footsteps, the particular silence of someone who has just found water where there wasn't any. She came back to the fence and looked at him across the top rail. The south line was cut, she said. Yes, ma'am. You fixed it. Yes, ma'am. She looked at him steadily. Her eyes were the pale gray of a sky deciding between rain and something worse, and they had the same quality, not cold. Exactly, but measuring. When were you going to tell me? When I figured out whether it was the Aldridge boys being stupid or something with more intention behind it. He picked up the rope he'd been working on. It wasn't the Aldridge boys. She came through the gate. How do you know? The cut was clean. Patient. And whoever made it knew where the line surfaced, which isn't something you find by accident. They'd walked the property before. He kept his hands moving on the rope. You had hands leave after the barn fire. Any of them leave on bad terms? 1. Pete Garza. He wanted more than I could pay, and I told him so. She folded her arms against the wind, which was coming out of the north now, colder than yesterday. You think he'd come back and cut a water line? Maybe. Or maybe someone sent him. He paused. Any neighbors made offers on the ranch lately? Her expression shifted in a way he recognized the narrowing that happened when a question landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to. Harlan Voss, she said. 6 months ago. I said no. She said it the way people said things they intended to keep saying. Daniel kept his face still. He pulled the rope through his hands and felt the familiar controlled tightening in his chest. The one that had been there since he loaded his children into the wagon in Copper Falls and pointed the horse northeast. What did Voss say when you told him no? He smiled. Anna said. And he said he hoped things got easier for me. In a tone that meant he thought they wouldn't. They stood there in the wind for a moment, the rope going through his hands, the cold working its way through his jacket. Anna was watching him with that measuring look, and he thought she was about to ask something direct. He was almost ready to let her. Then Eli called from the barn, the way the boy had of making a single word carry exactly the urgency required, and the moment passed. The man rode in on a Thursday afternoon, when Anna was in town and Daniel was restacking the hay bales in what was left of the barn structure. He heard the horse first, a big, heavy-footed animal, shod in a way that rang different from ranch horses, cleaner, more regular, the kind of shoeing done in a proper smithy with good iron. He put down the bale hook and went to the barn door. The man was broad-shouldered and well-dressed for the range, meaning his coat was new and his hat wasn't. He had a pistol on his right hip that he wore like he'd been told to wear it rather than like he'd grown up with it. He pulled up at the paddock fence and looked at Daniel with a flat, assessing look, the kind used by men who have been hired to do assessments. Looking for the owner, the man said. Miss Whitmore, she's not here. Daniel leaned against the barn doorframe and kept his hands loose and visible, a habit that had nothing to do with this man specifically. When she back? Later. He let that be the full answer. The man's gaze moved over the yard, taking inventory in a way that was too systematic to be casual. It moved across the rebuilt fence section and the new water trough fittings and the reorganized equipment lines that Daniel had spent the first week establishing. Then it moved back to Daniel with a slightly recalibrated expression. You a hand here? That's right. New? Recent? The man nodded slowly, as if adding that to a column of figures. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a card, which he held out toward Daniel. Daniel walked over and took it. The card was heavy stock, printed cleanly. Aldous Crane, Land Acquisitions, Voss Cattle and Land Company. Tell Miss Whitmore Mr. Voss has a new offer for the property, more generous than the last one. He said it pleasantly, the way a man says things when he is confident the pleasantness will eventually run out on the other person's side first. Daniel put the card in his shirt pocket. I'll tell her. Crane was already turning his horse. He did it smoothly, completely relaxed, and his horse turned with him. And that was when Daniel saw it. The brand on the horse's left flank. A modified V over a bar. Voss's brand, changed from the original a few years back when Voss had acquired the 3-bar spread and folded it into his operation. Daniel had helped design the combined brand himself, sitting across a table from Voss in the office in Copper Falls, a different life ago. He stood very still. He watched Crane ride down the road without looking back, the big horse's hooves kicking up the dry October dust, and he was aware that his hands had tightened at his sides before he made them stop. He was still standing there when he heard Eli behind him. Pa. The boy's voice was careful, the way it got when he was reading the situation. Was that a Voss horse? Get back to the bunkhouse. Pa. Take Clara and stay inside until I come. Don't open the door. He didn't look at his son. His eyes were on the road where the dust was settling. Do it now. Eli. There was a pause, and then the boy's footsteps went away quickly, which meant he understood. And Daniel was grateful and sorry for that in equal measure. Crane hadn't recognized him. He was fairly sure of that. The beard helped, and the context helped more. A man in a burned-down barn wearing work clothes didn't look like the foreman of a large-scale cattle operation because that wasn't who Daniel was anymore. He'd been careful about that. He'd been careful about all of it. But Voss was in the territory. Voss was interested in this particular ranch. And Voss was the kind of man who kept detailed, careful notes on every person who had ever known anything about his business. That night, while Eli and Clara slept in the bunkhouse, Daniel sat at the small table by the window with the leather satchel open in front of him. He didn't take anything out of it. He just rested his hand on the oilskin envelope inside, the one that held 8 months of his careful, quiet, furious record-keeping. And he thought about Crane's eyes moving over the yard, adding things to columns. He thought about the cut water pipe. He thought about the barn that had burned. He thought about Anna Whitmore, who checked the road when she thought no one was watching, and who held her lantern steady in the wind because there was work to be done. The sound of something in the night outside made him close the satchel and blow out the lamp. And for a long time he sat in the dark listening. It turned out to be a branch, knocked loose by the wind off the mountain, but it took him a while to be sure of that. He didn't sleep easily after. When he did, he dreamed about the road between Copper Falls and Ridgeline, and how it went in only 2 directions, and how he'd come from one of them, and was running out of reasons to think the other one would stay empty. Anna found the satchel on a Wednesday. She wasn't looking for it, which was what she told herself later, and which was only partly true. She was looking for a spare set of harness clips she thought she'd stored in the bunkhouse back room after the barn burned. And she was looking for them while Daniel was out on the range with the 2 remaining hands, riding the east fence. She had gone in without thinking about it, and had not been thinking about the satchel at all, until she saw it wedged under the board shelf where Daniel's few personal effects were stored, half covered by a folded blanket, with the edge of a lock hasp showing. She stood there for a moment, aware of the particular quality of silence a room has when there is something in it that is specifically not for you. Then she crouched down and looked at it more carefully without touching it. The satchel was old leather, well cared for in the way that working men cared for tools they depended on. The lock was a small brass clasp, nothing extraordinary. What was extraordinary was the way it was situated, which was not casual. It had been pushed into the corner behind the shelf in a way that required a specific angle to access, the kind of placement that meant someone thought about where they were putting it. She stood up and went back to looking for the harness clips, which she found in a box under the window. She didn't touch the satchel, but that evening, when Daniel came in from the range and washed up at the pump and sat down at the supper table, Anna found herself watching his hands more than usual. They were foreman's hands. She'd understood that in the first week, the way he organized rather than just executed, the way he saw around corners on the ranch, the way he found the water pipe without being told to look. A working hand was capable. A foreman thought ahead. She'd had 2 foremen in her life on this ranch, and Daniel was better than either of them, which was information she had been sitting with and not entirely liking. She had also been sitting with the name Harlan Voss, which Crane's card had put back in the front of her mind. She declined Voss's first offer in April. She'd thought that would be the end of it. The pipe, now, and the barn before she'd met Daniel, and 2 hands leaving in the same week. She had been treating those things as separate entries in a ledger of bad luck. She was no longer sure they were separate. She watched Daniel help Clara cut her meat into pieces, patient in the way that people only were when they had done the same thing many hundreds of times, and she decided to wait. She waited 3 more days, and then she didn't. "I went in the bunkhouse yesterday," she said. She said it on a Friday morning, over coffee, before Daniel had gone out. The children were still asleep. "I was looking for harness clips. I found them." She set her cup down on the porch railing. "I also saw the satchel." Daniel's expression didn't change in any dramatic way. It went quieter, which was different, like a fire burning lower rather than going out. "All right," he said. "There's something locked in it." "Yes." "What is it?" He looked at his coffee for a moment. Then he looked at her. "Papers," he said. "Documentation. Of what?" He was quiet long enough that she felt the irritation rising in her the way it always rose when people treated her like she couldn't hold information. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "I have had a barn burned down and a water line cut and a man from the Voss Land Company ride onto my property to make me an offer I have already refused once. If you have papers in that satchel that have anything to do with any of those things, I need to know about it." "It's not," he stopped. "It's not as simple as telling you." "Then make it simple." He looked out at the range, at the cattle moving slowly against the flat gray sky, and she could see him deciding something, running some internal calculation she wasn't party to. "I was foreman at the Voss operation for 6 years," he said, "out of Copper Falls. I managed the East Range, about 9,000 acres, 28 hands." Anna said nothing. She waited. 14 months ago, I started noticing things in the books that didn't fit. Payments to a survey company that wasn't doing any survey work I could account for. Legal fees that weren't associated with any case I knew about. Land acquisition costs for properties that were listed as purchased but that I knew weren't for sale because I knew the families who owned them. I started keeping notes. He stopped again, and then I went to Voss with what I had because I thought maybe there was an explanation I was missing. And he smiled at me and told me that I was a trusted employee, and he appreciated my diligence. His voice had gone flat in a way that was not without feeling, but the feeling was held somewhere below the surface, under pressure. 4 days later, the Bellamy family's barn burned. The Bellamys had a ranch on the Copper Falls Creek, about 200 acres. They sold to Voss the following week, for half what it was worth, because they had children and a burned barn and winter coming. He paused. A month after that, the Farleys sold. Then the Ortegas, all people who had refused Voss offers. All properties along the route of a planned railway line I'd seen on a map in Voss's office, a map I was not supposed to see. Anna stood very still at the porch railing, her coffee going cold again. "I left," Daniel said. "I took the records I'd been keeping and I took my children and I left Copper Falls at 4 in the morning because I had just realized that I was the foreman who knew about all of it, and that at some point Voss would calculate that it was simpler to not have me around." "The papers in the satchel," Anna said. "What exactly are they?" 8 months of account records. Ledger copies. Notes on the survey company. 3 written statements from hands who wouldn't sign official documents but agreed to tell me what they'd seen. He met her eyes. "They're what you'd need to file a formal complaint with the Territorial Marshal's office. They're also what Voss has been looking for since I left, which is why I don't stay anywhere near a town, and why I don't keep them where anyone can find them." Anna looked at him for a long time. She thought about the gate he'd closed behind him when he drove in. She thought about him asking how many papers the advertisement had run in. She thought about the look on his face when she'd mentioned the name Voss. "You picked this ranch," she said slowly, "because it was the last property in the railway survey area that Voss hadn't acquired." He held Herr Gaze. "Yes. So by coming here, by being seen here, you may have brought his attention directly to my door." "His attention was already here," Daniel said. "The barn. The water line. That happened before I arrived. He was already working on you." His jaw was tight. "I came because I thought if someone was here who knew his methods, who could see what he was planning before he executed it." "Without telling me any of this." "Without telling you any of this," he said. He didn't look away. "Because the people who know what's in that satchel become the people Voss considers dangerous. And you have a working ranch, and 2 neighbors he hasn't moved on yet, and a life you built." He stopped. "I didn't want to put that in your hands without being certain first." "Certain of what?" He seemed to consider the answer carefully. "That you could hold it." The silence between them was dense and specific. Anna picked up her cold coffee and set it back down. She looked out at the cattle, at the fence line Daniel had rebuilt in one evening with a lantern and a post digger and 2 hands that didn't shake. "Get your work done today," she said finally. "We're going to finish this conversation." She went inside before he could answer. She was in the kitchen, genuinely trying to think clearly about something other than Harlan Voss and locked satchels, when she heard a horse come up the road at a pace that meant business. She was at the window before she decided to move. It was Crane again, but this time he didn't stop at the paddock. He came all the way to the house and dismounted at the porch steps, and when Anna opened the door she saw that his pleasant expression was still in place but it had calcified around the edges. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "I apologize for calling unannounced again. Mr. Voss wanted me to follow up on the offer personally." He handed her a folded paper. "He's increased the figure. He's also asked me to mention, with all goodwill, that the Territorial Land Office has been dealing with some irregularities in records from this county. Apparently there's a former employee of Mr. Voss's who has some legal complications that may touch a number of properties in the area." He smiled, and the smile was the same as the offer, pleasant on its surface, with something contractual underneath. "Mr. Voss just wants to make sure you're protected. He's a neighbor, after all." Anna took the folded paper. She didn't open it. "Thank you, Mr. Crane," she said. "I'll be in touch." She watched him ride out. She stood in the doorway with the folded paper in her hand for a long time after the horse had gone out of sight. until Daniel appeared at the corner of the barn, watching her. She held up the paper. He crossed the yard to her. She handed it to him, and he unfolded it, and she watched what happened to his face as he read it. What happened was nothing she'd expected. He didn't look afraid. He looked, for just a moment, like a man who had been waiting for a specific shoe to drop and had finally heard it fall. "He knows I'm here," Daniel said. "What does the paper say?" He read it again, then handed it back. "It says Voss is offering you a fair price for the ranch, for your own protection, because there's a legal matter involving one of his former employees that could complicate land titles in the area." His voice was even and careful. "And the legal matter is me." The deed arrived on a Monday, brought by a different rider, a younger man in Voss's employ who left it in an envelope on the porch rail without knocking, like a bill slid under a door. Anna brought it inside and opened it at the kitchen table without calling Daniel. She read it twice, slowly. It was a land transfer agreement for a property adjacent to hers, the Calhoun spread, 40 acres, bordering her north pasture. The Calhouns had sold, or the papers said they had sold, 3 months ago. The signature at the bottom of the witness line read Times Daniel J. Brooks. She sat with that for a moment. The date on the document was July 14th. Daniel had arrived at her gate in the second week of October. The gap was 3 months. She put the paper in her apron pocket and went out to where Daniel and Eli were working on the roof patch above the old hay storage, replacing warped boards before the snow came. "Come down," she said. She said it quietly, because Eli was there. Daniel looked at her from the roof. Something in her posture told him what he needed to know, and he came down the ladder without asking why. Inside, she put the deed on the table and stepped back. He looked at it. He did not reach for it right away. He looked at his own name in the witness line, and his face did the thing it had done when he'd read Crane's letter, the thing where nothing moved but something underneath shifted like the earth settling after a long dry season. Then he pulled out the chair and sat down, and he put his hand flat on the table next to the paper, not touching it, just near it. And he was quiet for long enough that Anna started to speak. "Don't," he said. His voice was not sharp, but it had enough edge that she stopped. He looked up. "Please, let me say it clearly." He pressed his hand against the table surface, as if steadying himself. "That signature is not mine. I can see that it's your name. It is my name. It is not my handwriting. And on July 14th I was in Billings, sleeping in a livery stable with my children and trying to figure out how long my money would last." He met her eyes. "I never signed anything for Voss after the day I left. I never went back to Copper Falls. I have not been in this county until I drove through your gate." Anna stood with her arms folded, the familiar weight of her own skepticism pressed against her ribs. "That's a very convenient answer. It's the true one. Why would Voss forge your signature on a land transfer?" Daniel got up and went out of the kitchen. She heard his footsteps cross the yard to the bunkhouse, and she heard him come back faster than he'd gone. He had the satchel. He put it on the table and unlocked it and took out the oilskin envelope. And he spread the contents across the table with the careful movements of a man who has handled these papers many times in the dark, in poor light, alone. There were ledger sheets, copied in his own hand from Voss's account books, with dates and figures and notations. There were 3 statements in other men's handwriting, signed or initialed at the bottom. There was a hand-drawn map of the railway survey corridor with ranch property lines marked in red. And there were 2 other land transfer deeds, folded in thirds, that Daniel placed on top. Anna unfolded them. Different properties, different dates, both carrying the signature Times Daniel J. Brooks Times as witness or executor. "He's been doing this since March," Daniel said, "using my name to create a paper record. If anyone challenges the transfers, the document trail leads to me, a former employee who left under unclear circumstances, who can't be found, who apparently has been operating across the county doing Voss's dirty work." He sat back down, his hands flat on the table beside the papers. "And if I surface to deny it, Voss already has a story. Former trusted employee went rogue, falsified documents, can't be trusted. Look at the evidence." Anna looked at the papers spread across her kitchen table. The dates, the property names, the line of the railway corridor. She looked at the map and saw her own property line marked in red, and something cold settled into the space behind her breastbone. "The Bellamy barn," she said. "The one you told me about." "Yes. My barn. He held Hergaze." "Yes." She put her hands flat on the table too. "Mirror of his." and they were both quiet for a moment in the way of two people standing in a burning house trying to agree on which door to use. She looked at the copy of Voss's ledger. She looked at the railway map. She looked at the forged deed with Daniel's name on it. And she thought about the pipe cut with a clean, patient blade. And she thought about the sound of her barn going up in September, the way the whole sky had gone orange, and she had stood in the yard in her nightgown, understanding that some things cannot be undone. She had blamed bad luck. She had blamed the dry summer. She had told herself the hands leaving was coincidence. She had been so determined to be competent that she had refused to see that someone was being thorough. There are two other ranches in this corridor, she said. The McIntosh place and the Dunnigan property. McIntosh already sold. I didn't know that until this week. His voice was tired in a way that was not about sleep. Dunnigan is holding, but he's got a sick herd and no ready money. He'll break before spring, unless Voss is stopped before spring. Yes. Anna looked at the oilskin envelope, at the weight of paper inside it. If I ride to Ridgeline and file at the marshal's office tomorrow, Voss has a lawyer in Ridgeline. Not in the marshal's office, but close enough to it. Daniel said it without bitterness, which made it worse. The lawyer's name is Whitcomb. He's filed 3 land challenges on Voss's behalf in the past year. If you file a complaint with what we have, Voss will know about it before nightfall, and Whitcomb will move to have the documents declared forgeries before a judge can review the substance. So, we need to go over Ridgeline. She was thinking aloud, not asking. The territorial marshal's office in Grover City, that's 2 days' ride. I know how far it is. Going alone, through country Voss is working. I know the country. She looked at him. You can't go. If Voss's man sees you on the road, you're not a ranch hand anymore. You're the fugitive foreman they've been building a case against. They can have you arrested before you're 5 miles out. She paused. But he's not building a case against me yet. Daniel was quiet. She could see him turning the argument over, looking for the flaw in it, finding it and not finding it. There's something else, he said. Before you decide, she waited. If I had come to you in the first week and told you all of this, he said, and his voice was careful and quiet the way voices got when they were carrying more than they appeared to, you would have sent me away. She opened her mouth to disagree. You would have, he said, not unkindly. Because you are very good at protecting this ranch, and the safest thing for this ranch would have been to not have me on it. He looked at the papers. I made a choice that was not mine to make. I knew what I was doing. He looked up again. I'm sorry for that. Anna looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the double hitch on the gate post. She thought about him holding the post digger in the dark while she held the lantern. She thought about the way Eli, on the 3rd day, had started talking to her the way children talked when they had decided to trust someone, and she thought about what it meant that a 9-year-old with sharp eyes and his father's careful manner had decided she was worth talking to. Can you get a message to the Dunnigan Ranch? She said. I know where it is. Tonight. Tell them to move their cattle to the creek pasture and not answer the door to anyone they don't know. She gathered the papers and the deeds and looked at the oilskin envelope. I'm making a copy of these tonight. I'll take the originals to Grover City. Anna. He said her name without the ma'am for the first time, and she felt the weight of it the same way you felt the first drop of rain after a dry August, surprising and not surprising at all. The road through the canyon. Voss has men who watch it. I know. I should go. You can't go. She held his gaze. I can. And I will. She picked up the oilskin envelope and held it the way you held something you decided to be responsible for. Make sure the children are inside before dark. She was at the kitchen door when she heard him push back from the table. Anna. She stopped, her hand on the doorframe. There's something you should know, he said. About why I came here. About the specific ranch. She turned around. The railway map, he said. I've been carrying it for 3 months. I've looked at every property in the corridor, and yours was the last one. The one farthest out, the one that hadn't been touched yet. I came here because I needed somewhere that was still outside Voss's reach. Somewhere I could put my children and know they'd be fed and safe while I figured out what to do. He paused. But I also came here because your barn had already burned and your water line had already been cut, and I knew what that meant, and I knew what was coming next. And I thought he stopped. You thought what? I thought someone ought to know what was coming, he said. Before it got here, she stood in the doorway for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet. The papers were on the table between them. Get some sleep, she said. I'm leaving at midnight. She heard him exhale, slow and long. and she was already out the door before she had to decide what to do with the fact that it sounded less like relief and more like a man finally setting down something very heavy. Outside, the sky was clear and crowded with stars, and it was cold enough that her breath came out visible in the air. And the cattle were quiet in the far pasture, and the road south toward the canyon was dark and empty and waiting. She looked at it. Then she went inside to make her copies. The canyon road was not empty. Anna knew it wouldn't be. She had counted on Voss watching the road the same way she had counted on the dark and the cold working in her favor, and she had left at midnight rather than dawn because the men who watch roads for pay are less alert at 2 in the morning than at any other hour. She had the originals in the oilskin envelope inside her coat, pressed against her ribs, and she had left the copies locked in the deed box under her floorboards, with a note that said Times Grover City, Territorial Marshal, Amos Pickett, then Dunnigan. The note was for Daniel. She made it through the first 3 miles without difficulty, picking the rocky shoulder of the road where the sound of her horse's hooves was quieter, keeping to the shadow side of the canyon wall. The stars gave enough light to see by, and she knew this road. She had ridden it in the dark for other reasons, after other hard nights, and the knowledge sat in her body rather than in her head, which was the most reliable kind. It was at the canyon narrows, where the road pinched between the rock face and the creek, that she saw the fire, not a campfire. A lantern, held low, and 3 horses standing at the edge of the road in the manner of horses that had been standing there for a while. She pulled up before they heard her. Her horse, a steady quarter-horse mare named Dust, who had earned every syllable of patience Anna had ever given her, stood without speaking. 3 men. 2 she didn't know. The third was Crane. She had 2 choices, which she understood immediately, and with the kind of clarity that very cold, very quiet moments sometimes produced. She could turn back, and they would hear the hoofbeats, and they would know someone had tried the road. Or she could ride through, because she had not yet done anything illegal, and there was a version of this in which Aldous Crane could not detain a property owner on a public road in the middle of the night without better cause than he currently had. She chose through. She kept Dust at a walk, which was harder than keeping her at a gallop, and she came around the bend into the lantern light without hurrying, and she looked at Crane the way she had looked at every man who had stood in her path with the specific expectation that she would stop and wait. "Miss Whitmore," Crane said. He managed to sound unsurprised and almost politely concerned. "Riding late?" "I am," she said. "Canyon road's not easy in the dark. I've ridden it before." She kept Dust moving. Not fast. Not slow. "Good night, Mr. Crane." His horse stepped sideways and blocked her, not violently, just firmly, with the practiced ease of a man who had learned to use a horse the way other men used a hand on a shoulder. "Mr. Voss would like to speak with you," Crane said. "At your convenience. First thing tomorrow morning would suit him. I'll let him know when my convenience allows it. Miss Whitmore." His voice lost its pleasantness, the way the last of autumn leaves finally let go. And what was underneath was not angry, exactly, just operational. "You have papers with you." "I have my coat," she said. "And my patience, which is wearing." "The former employee," Crane said. "Brooks. You understand that what he's told you, whatever he's shown you, is the accounting of a man who left his employer's service under contested circumstances. A man who has reason to make trouble." "I understand several things," Anna said. "One of them is that the deed you brought to my property last week has that man's signature on it, dated 3 months before he came to my county, and I'd like a judge to explain that to me." Silence. The creek made its sound below them. One of the other horses shifted its weight. Crane reached across and took hold of Dust's bridle. Not rough. Just conclusive. "I'm going to ask you to come with me, Miss Whitmore. For your own comfort, overnight. You can speak with Mr. Voss in the morning." Anna looked at his hand on the bridle. She looked at the 2 men behind him. She looked at the canyon wall on one side and the creek on the other. And she thought about the copies locked in the deed box and the note she had left and what Daniel would do with it. And she said, "All right," because she had already been to the post at Ridgeline. She had gone at 4 in the afternoon, while Daniel was on the east fence with Eli. And she had given the second copy, the one she hadn't mentioned to Daniel, to a man named Russell who had been the mail rider between Ridgeline and Grover City for 11 years, and who owed her a debt from a matter involving his nephew and a missing calf. A matter she had declined to escalate. She had told Russell to deliver the envelope to Territorial Marshal Amos Pickett personally, and to mention the Voss Land Company by name, because she had learned from her father that the territorial marshal in Grover City had lost a cousin to a land grab in the Wyoming Territory 8 years prior, and took those cases personally. She had already done the most important thing. What came next was just a matter of holding on. They held her at Crane's camp at the far end of the canyon, not in a tent but beside the fire, with no roughness beyond the insistence that she stay seated and not ride off, which she accepted. Crane sent one rider ahead to notify Voss and left one behind to watch her, and he sat across the fire from her with his hat in his hands, and for a while they regarded each other in the way of two people who have each made their calculation and are waiting for the arithmetic to resolve. "He's going to offer you money," Crane said, around 2 in the morning. He said it without rancor, almost informatively, as if they had moved past the pretense of the situation. "A fair amount." "He already has," Anna said. "More than that." "Why?" Crane looked at the fire. "The railway contract has a land certification deadline. February 1st. If there's a legal challenge outstanding, the contract void provisions activate." He seemed to be deciding how much to say, and landed on enough. "He needs this settled. He needs the remaining properties. He needs mine." "Yes." Anna looked at the fire too. "Mr. Crane," she said, "has it occurred to you that you work for a man who burns barns?" A long silence. "I acquire land," Crane said. "That's what I do." "You know what he does to acquire it." Another silence, longer. He put his hat back on. Dawn came slowly, as it did in October, the light building at the edges of the canyon walls before it reached the floor. Anna heard the horse before she saw it. Then 2 horses. Then she recognized the sound of a larger group, and Crane stood up, and the man watching her moved to his horse. 4 riders came through the canyon, and the one in front was not the rider Crane had sent to Voss. The one in front had a tin star on his coat and a face she had never seen before. And behind him were 2 deputies and the man named Russell, who was carrying his mail bag and looking extremely alert for this hour of the morning. "Aldous Crane," the marshal said. "I'm Amos Pickett, territorial marshal out of Grover City. I need you to keep your hands where I can see them." His voice carried the particular authority of a man who had spent years making sure people did exactly what he said. He looked at Anna. "Miss Whitmore, are you harmed?" "No," she said. "Just cold. We received your envelope." He was already dismounting. "We also received, this morning, a separate filing from an attorney in Ridgeline named Whitcomb, seeking an injunction against a Daniel Brooks on behalf of the Voss Cattle and Land Company." He produced a folded paper from his coat. "The injunction names Brooks as the primary agent in a series of fraudulent land transfers." He looked at it, then at Crane. "I'm going to want to talk to Mr. Voss about that, and I'm going to want to talk to Mr. Brooks as well." Anna opened her mouth and closed it. She had not anticipated this part. "Marshal," she said carefully, "the documents I sent you should make clear that Daniel Brooks's signature on those transfers is forged." "They're suggestive," Pickett said, "in the way of a man who dealt in evidence rather than suggestions." "Suggestive is not the same as settled. Mr. Brooks needs to present himself." He looked at her steadily. "Where is he?" She was back at the ranch by 7 in the morning, ahead of the marshal's party, and she rode through the gate and found Daniel at the well, drawing water for the morning, and Eli beside him with a bucket. Daniel looked at her face and set down the rope. "He needs you to come in," she said. She said it from the saddle, still catching her breath from the ride. "The marshal, he has the documents, but there's an injunction." Voss moved fast. "They've named you." She stopped. She had thought, on the ride back, about how to say this efficiently. She had not thought about how it would feel to say it to a man who was looking at her the way Daniel was looking at her, which was with the expression of someone who had expected this specific outcome and had been hoping very hard to be wrong. "I know," he said quietly. "They're going to hold you while they review the documents. Pickett seems like a man who reads things carefully. But it's going to take time, and Voss's lawyer is already moving, Anna." He said it the same way he had said it the night before, her name without the formality, and she stopped. "There's something else," he said. "Daniel, we don't have Eli." He said it louder, and the boy came around from the far side of the well where he'd been standing just outside the conversation. "Tell Miss Whitmore what you told me last night." The boy looked up at her. He had his father's eyes, that steady, direct brown that didn't flinch. "I heard him," Eli said. "Mr. Voss, when we were still in Copper Falls, before we left, I woke up in the night and Pa wasn't in the room, and I went down to find him, and I heard voices in the office." He was careful and methodical, the way 9-year-olds were when they understood that what they were saying mattered. Mr. Voss told someone to sign Pa's name to the paper. He said Pa would never be found because Pa was running. He said if anyone asked, Pa had done it on his own before he disappeared. He paused. I know what I heard. Anna looked at the boy for a long moment. Then she looked at Daniel. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because he's 9 years old, Daniel said. And Voss has resources I don't. And a good lawyer can make a child's testimony disappear in front of a judge if the child is the only witness. He looked at his son. But with your documents and the ledger records and Russell's account of the second copy delivery and what Eli heard, he stopped. It's enough. With a marshal who reads carefully, it's enough. It has to be enough, Anna said. She turned dust toward the gate. Because they're coming up the road in 20 minutes. Eli went to Clara. Daniel went inside for the satchel, and he came back out with it under his arm. And he paused at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at Anna still on her horse. I should have told you sooner, he said. All of it. I made you carry this alone last night because I was trying to protect you from what I should have given you the information to protect yourself with. That's not. He stopped. That's not a thing I can make smaller than it is. No, she said. It isn't. She looked at him. You can apologize properly when this is done. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, but was the shape where a smile lived when a person had forgotten how to wear one. All right, he said. The marshal's party came through the gate, and Daniel went with them. He went without argument and without flinching, and he walked his horse beside Marshal Pickett with the quiet, steady manner of a man who had decided that the only way through certain things was through them. And Anna sat dust at the gate and watched him go and told herself that what she was feeling was the relief of the situation resolving. She was not entirely convincing. The review took 4 days. Harlan Voss arrived in Ridgeline on the second day, with his lawyer Whitcomb, and they presented their case to the territorial magistrate with professional confidence. Whitcomb was skilled and precise, and he dismantled 2 of the ledger pages as inconclusive, and he argued that a child's nighttime recollection in a strange house was not grounds for a criminal investigation of a man of Voss's standing. He had not, however, seen Crane's fire. Marshal Pickett had been at Crane's fire. He had arrived there at dawn and found a land acquisition agent detaining a ranch owner on a public road, without cause. At 2 in the morning, he mentioned this to the magistrate in the specific tone he had developed over many years of being a man who noticed things and waited for the right moment to name them. Whitcomb's confidence adjusted slightly. On the 3rd day, a survey engineer named Tobias Marsh arrived in Ridgeline on his own initiative, having heard about the Voss matter through channels that ran through the cattle trading network of 3 counties, and he produced his own records of a payment he had received from the Voss Land Company to conduct a railway survey along the corridor, a survey he had never been given credit for in any of Voss's official filing. Marsh had his own reasons for being unhappy about this. On the 4th day, the magistrate issued a finding against Voss on the land transfer charges, referred the criminal matter to the territorial court, and ordered the transfers involving the forged signatures voided pending review. Daniel came back through Anna's gate on a Thursday evening, in the same wagon he had arrived in, with Eli beside him on the bench and Clara asleep in the back with her piece of quilt. The light was going, orange-gray and cold, the kind of light that October gave you in the last hour before full dark. Anna was on the porch. She had told herself she was on the porch because there was a north wind and she had been inside all day and the air helped her think. She had been on the porch for 40 minutes. Daniel pulled the wagon up and stopped it and sat there for a moment with the reins in his hands, looking at her. Eli looked at her. Clara, not yet awake, made a small sound and pulled the quilt tighter. Miss Whitmore, Daniel said. His voice was quiet and careful, and the carefulness of it was not about not knowing what to say. It was about knowing too well and being unsure of the territory. The bunkhouse needs a new door latch, Anna said. The north pasture gate is loose at the hinge, and the water line near the south wash needs a second fitting before the ground freezes. He looked at her. Those things aren't going to fix themselves, she said. He was quiet for long enough that she felt the cold wind on her face and heard the cattle moving in the far pasture and the creak of the wagon as Clara shifted in her sleep. Then he tied the reins to the brake handle, which was the action of a man intending to stay a while, and he got down from the wagon. He came to the porch steps and stopped. I owe you an apology, he said. A proper one. You said so. I did. I'm sorry, he said. I kept things from you because I thought I was being careful. I was being afraid. He looked at her with the tired brown eyes that had stopped being simply tired somewhere in the past 4 weeks and had started being something else as well. Something with more wakefulness in it. That's not the same thing. No, she said. It isn't. She stepped down off the porch, one step, which put her at his level on the path. The apology is noted. Is it accepted? She looked at him in the fading light. She thought about her grandmother, who had trusted the wrong man and lost the first Whitmore land, and her mother, who had trusted no one after and been right to and wrong to in equal measure, and herself, who had put an advertisement in 3 papers and asked for one capable man, and gotten something considerably more complicated. She thought about the lantern light in the dark, and the double hitch on the gatepost, and a 9-year-old boy deciding she was worth talking to. Ask me in the spring, she said. When the fences hold, he looked at her. The shape of the smile that lived in him surfaced a little more clearly this time, and she found she was not entirely opposed to the sight of it. He nodded, once. The nod of a man accepting terms he finds more than reasonable. She turned toward the door. Supper's at 6, she said. Children eat first. Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Brooks. She had her hand on the door. The gate. When you drove in tonight, I closed it, he said. I know, she said. I heard it. She went inside. The fire in the kitchen needed stoking, and there was a pot that had been sitting too long on the heat, and she attended to both of these things without particular hurry, and the sounds from outside settled into the familiar pattern of a wagon being unhitched, a horse being led to the paddock, a man's voice speaking quietly to the animal and then to the children, all of it domestic and purposeful and unglamorous, in the way that the most necessary things always were. She did not stoke the fire in the parlor, which she rarely used. She set a cup on the kitchen table, and then she set a second one. She had not slept well in 6 weeks, not since the night the barn went up and the sky turned orange, and she had understood that something was coming that she was not positioned to face alone. The children's voices came in from outside. Clara awake now and asking about supper with the 4-year-old's complete indifference to circumstance, and Eli answering her in his careful older brother way. The pot was ready. The table was set for 3, plus 2 cups. The door opened, and cold air came in ahead of them, and then the sound of small boots on the kitchen floor and a familiar set of footsteps behind them, and Anna Whitmore took the pot off the heat and told herself that the ranch was still standing, and the fence held, and the water line would need that second fitting before the ground froze. She did not tell herself anything about the second cup. Some things did not require naming to be true.